Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWUS College Football Saturday Week 8. Gonna go through as many games as I can in this video. Whatever I don't get to, we'll go through on the live show. That's at 10 a.m. Eastern Time up to kickoff. We'll be live for 2 straight hours. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the comments. Week 8, let's do it.
Welcome to the SWUS. The SWUS. Hey, get the SWUS.
First up, we're in the Big Ten. We got Nebraska on the road at 9, Indiana. Nebraska at Indiana here. Hoosiers are laying 6.5 across the board. Total sitting at 49.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to this data, tickets coming in on Nebraska, over 65% of the tickets on Nebraska. Money is closer to 50-50. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Nebraska offense. Not quite what I was expecting this year. I mean, Nebraska coming in with a strong offensive line, 2 big physical backs. I was expecting Matt Rule to hand the ball off a lot, take the pressure off of Raiola, run the football, let your superstar freshman quarterback develop. But unfortunately, the run game hasn't been quite as efficient as we expected it to be. They're just 90th in yards per carry, 50th in success rate per rush, 77th in effective rush. So Raiola's had to make more plays than I think Matt Rule intended him to this season. That being said, he's been making them. I mean, Raiola looks pretty good. Nebraska's passing attack is 46th in yards per pass attempt, 33rd in success rate per dropback, 43rd in effective pass. Now, if you look on the other side of this graphic at Indiana's defense, raw data looks excellent. 16th in the country in yards per play allowed, 12th in success rate. But if you look at the schedule-adjusted metrics, 57th, 61st, 75th. The reason for that is when it comes to Indiana's defense, this team has played nobody. I mean, Indiana's offense is pretty proven, and we'll talk about that in a second. But as far as Indiana's defense, I mean, this team has not seen even a decent offense. I think Maryland would be the strongest offense that Indiana's seen all year. So how does Raiola match up against this Indiana defense? Well, as I said, he's been pretty good this year. 1,355 yards, 7.9 yards per pass attempt, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He protects the football, a turnover-worthy play rate. Not a ton of downfield passing, just a C- at big-time throw rate. But again, I don't really think that's the offense Matt Rule was looking for this season. I think he was expecting more production out of the run game. But in terms of Raiola, I mean, he got off to the season a little slow. In his first 2 games against UTEP and Colorado, they were averaging just 234.5 passing yards per game, just over 7 yards per attempt, just over 40% success rate per dropback. Then there was a 3-game stretch where Raiola was killing it. Yes, one of those games was against an FCS program, and another one was against Purdue, but Illinois is in there. Regardless, in this 3-game stretch, 274 passing yards per game, almost 9.6 yards per pass attempt, 57.2% success rate per dropback. So there was a 3-game stretch where Raiola was looking really good. Questionable competition, obviously we have to mention. And then there's last game against Rutgers, and he didn't look good at all. Just 164 passing yards in the game, 5.9 yards per attempt, 22.7% success rate per dropback. Now, Rutgers has a very good pass defense. They're vulnerable to the run, but this was a bad game. And now he's going to try to throw the ball on an Indiana defense that's been great against the pass all year. They're allowing just 5.52 yards per pass attempt on the season, 35.4% success rate per dropback. Now, when we start to look at who they've played, it makes a little more sense. I mean, through their first 4 games, their opponents were FIU, Western Illinois, an FCS program, UCLA, which is a terrible offense, and Charlotte. So, I mean, yeah, the questionable competition here. Obviously, they racked up elite numbers against the pass in these 4 games. In their last 2 games, they're seeing a little bit tougher competition, and the numbers don't look quite as elite. I mean, still solid, 6.7 yards per attempt, 266 passing yards allowed per game, 41.7% success rate per dropback against Maryland and Northwestern. So, I mean, better competition. I wouldn't compare either of these offenses to Nebraska in terms of talent, though. To be honest, the biggest question is right here. Indiana's defensive line. Are they this good or not? Now, in case you don't follow Indiana football, their defensive front is comprised of a lot of pieces from the James Madison team last year. And that James Madison unit had an excellent run defense. Granted, they played in the Sun Belt Conference, but still, they brought in experienced pieces from a very good run defense last year. So it's not crazy to think Indiana has a great run defense, has a great defensive front. The thing is, when the best offenses you've seen so far this year are Northwestern and Maryland, I tend to question the numbers a little bit. Not that Nebraska has the best offensive line in the country, but it's certainly very good, and it's certainly the best offensive line they've seen so far this year. They're 26th in run blocking grade, 54th in line yards, 9th in stuff rate. This is a good offensive line. I mean, they struggled a little bit in pass protection. I'm not saying Nebraska's offensive line is going to come in here and bulldoze Indiana. Not at all. In fact, I think Nebraska's offensive line is going to struggle. I think this Indiana defensive front is good, just not that good. Not top 5 in the country good. So now that they're going to start seeing some tougher offensive competition, I do expect the defensive front to look a little more vulnerable. Wow, it's early. That's all I'm trying to say with that. Plus, it's not like things are going well for the Nebraska offense. I mean, the run game looked pretty good for the first 3 games against Colorado, UTEP, and UNI. 4.9 yards per carry, almost a 49% success rate per rush. In their last 3 games, I mean, the run game has gone south. Just 2.91 yards per carry. 44.3% success rate per rush is actually pretty good. But look at the opponents. Illinois is not a strong run defense. Purdue is a terrible run defense. Rutgers is a terrible run defense. This is against 3 questionable run defenses, and Nebraska's still struggling to get the run game going. So I think we have enough of a sample size to straight up say this Nebraska rushing attack might not be very good. So even though we are seeing the Indiana run defense numbers come back to earth a bit, they racked up really nice looking stats against FIU, William and Mary, UCLA. I mean, elite looking numbers, under 2 yards per carry in their last 3 games against Charlotte, Maryland, and Northwestern. Not quite as elite. 4.02 yards per carry allowed, 37.5% success rate per rush. So even though we are seeing Indiana's run defense numbers come down to earth a bit, this is Nebraska rushing attack is not working out. It doesn't look nearly as good as I thought it was going to look. In fact, it looks straight up bad, which means there's going to be a lot of pressure on Dylan Raiola to make plays on the road. That place is going to be going crazy. Overall, I really don't like this matchup for Nebraska's offense, and I'm not all in on Indiana's defense at all. In fact, I'm looking for an opportunity to sell and fade that defense, but this isn't it. They should be able to give Nebraska's offense all kinds of problems. Now, what about on the other side of the ball, though? What about the Indiana offense looking elite? I mean, look at the passing numbers. 7th in the country in yards per pass attempt, 1st in success rate per dropback, 6th in effective pass. Rushing numbers look pretty damn good as well. This Indiana offense is 11th in the country in yards per play. But here's the thing. I can poke holes in the Nebraska offense. This defense looks pretty good. I mean, they're 14th in DFEI. They're 6th in yards per play allowed in the country. 3rd in yards per carry allowed. 18th in yards per pass attempt allowed. So something's got to give here in this matchup, because on the other side, I'm willing to call BS on Nebraska's offense, and I'm willing to call BS on Indiana's defense. But on this side, Indiana's offense looks real, and Nebraska's defense looks real. This is the premier matchup of this game right here. Can Nebraska's defense stop the Hoosier offense? Curtis Rourke so far this year has been excellent, looking like a Heisman Trophy winner. Over 1,750 yards passing, 10.9 yards per pass attempt, 14 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And the crazy part is, his worst game was week 1 against FIU. In the 5 games since FIU, Indiana's averaging over 342 passing yards per game. 64.3% success rate per dropback is truly crazy. Over 12 yards per attempt. This passing attack looks absolutely insane. And when it comes to their opponents on the other side, when I was talking about Indiana's defense, I'll be like, they haven't played anybody. UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern. But when we're talking about the offense, Northwestern's got a legitimate defense. UCLA's defense is pretty good. Maryland's defense is pretty strong. So when it comes to Indiana's offense, they're a lot more proven, in my opinion. This will be their toughest test, though. We've only seen this Nebraska defense get thrown on once. Illinois, 215 yards, 8 yards per attempt, 57.7% success rate per dropback. That's the only game where we saw Nebraska's defense looking vulnerable to the pass. In their other games, they're allowing just 5.78 yards per pass attempt, 33.2% success rate per dropback. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad competition here, but Shedeur Sanders in Colorado's in there. I mean, they give him all kinds of problems in that game. This is a really tough matchup to get a feel for. I mean, you look at the Nebraska pass rush, they're 10th in pressure rate, 23rd in sack rate, 9th in pass rush grade. But then flip it over to Indiana's offensive line. They've been elite in pass protection so far this year. 20th in pressure rate, 16th in sack rate, 21st in pass blocking grade. So something has to give here. The Nebraska pass rush or the Indiana offensive line. Both have looked great so far this year. Now, the good news for Indiana is Curtis Work has been excellent when pressured. I mean, look at the splits. You don't even see a drop-off in production here. He's done a great job handling pressure so far this season. I will say he hasn't seen a pass rush quite like Nebraska's yet. Northwestern does have a good pass rush, but Nebraska is looking like they might have a top 10, top 15 pass rush this year. And I'm not so sure if Curtis Work is going to have run support in this game. If you look at their last 4 games, they've seen some tough defenses, and they're still running the ball. 4.39 yards per carry, 48.2% success rate per rush. This has looked like a very good rushing attack, but no one has really run the ball on Nebraska all year. Just 2.81 yards per carry allowed this season. So, like I said, this is going to be Indiana's toughest test. So where does that leave us in terms of placing a bet? You got to go under here. 49.5, right? I think some of Indiana's box scores are maybe driving this total up a bit. This is going to be their offense's toughest test. Like I said, I do think Indiana's defense is able to give Nebraska's offense some problems, mostly because I don't think Nebraska's offense is that good. So I could see this being a defensive game. Clock running. 49.5 is a high total, especially for this Big Ten matchup here. Give me the under. 49.5. Next game, UCLA out east in Piscataway. Rutgers is laying 4.5 points at home. Total sitting at 40.5. Pretty much, I do see a 41 actually, but pretty much 40.5 for this one. Let's take a quick look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in on the UCLA side. Over 65% of the tickets, about 75% of the money on UCLA. But as I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's talk about this one. UCLA's offense might be the perfect matchup for Rutgers defensively. I mean, if you followed Rutgers football this year, they have a glaring weakness. They can't stop the run for shit. I mean, they're 119th in the country in yards per carry allowed, 122nd in success rate per rush, 97th in effective rush defensively. So it's great news for Rutgers that they're matched up against one of the worst rushing attacks in the country in UCLA. They're actually dead last in success rate per rush, 130th in yards per carry, 116th in effective rush. This Rutgers defensive front has been consistently beaten, 104th in line yards, 73rd in stuff rate, 127th in power success rate. Good news, though, UCLA's offensive line can't generate any push at all. 132nd in line yards, 116th in stuff rate. So like I said, UCLA's offense might finally be a matchup for Rutgers defense where they could actually look like a good physical defensive front here. In their last 4 games, UCLA's averaging 1.88 yards per carry as a team. That's over a 4-game sample. Granted, I mean, Penn State, Oregon, Minnesota, these are tough defensive fronts, but LSU's in there. LSU is not a tough defensive front. That's not a good run defense at all. So, yeah, safe to say this is a really bad rushing attack. So I know it's concerning when you look at Rutgers' last 2 home games here against Washington and Wisconsin, allowing 30 points a game, 52.3% success rate, 7.7 yards per play. It looks bad. This defense looks bad. That being said, Washington and Wisconsin, I don't even like Wisconsin's offense. It's still miles better than UCLA. I mean, this team has no rushing attack whatsoever, and even though this Rutgers defensive front has been bad, they're also injured. They lost their best player before the season starts. Give them a little bit of slack, but yeah, I don't think UCLA is the offense that can exploit Rutgers' weakness defensively. So I like the matchup for Rutgers defense. That's not something I say often. That being said, on the other side of the ball, I don't really like the matchup for Rutgers offense. Obviously, we know not much of a passing attack here with Kali Manis. Rutgers just 104th in yards per pass attempt, 97th in success rate per dropback, 101st in effective pass. This is a Rutgers offense that needs to run the ball. They need to give the ball to Monangai. They need to give the ball to Samuel Brown. They're 61st in the country in yards per carry, 38th in success rate per rush, 32nd in effective rush. This is a run-first offense all the way. UCLA has actually defended the run pretty well. They're 19th in the country in yards per carry, 95th in success rate per rush, 48th in effective rush. In their last 2 games against Penn State and Minnesota, UCLA is just allowing 2.33 yards per carry, 63 rushing yards per game. Now, 46% success rate per rush actually isn't great. That indicates that Penn State and Minnesota were able to get their 4 and 5 yard carries in there. 3rd and shorts, 4th and shorts, they were able to convert those. But as a whole, this UCLA run defense has been very good. And this Rutgers rushing attack seems to be trending in the wrong direction. They started off the season hot. They ran all over Howard, ran all over Akron. Okay. In the 4 games since then against Virginia Tech, Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin, averaging just 3.84 yards per carry as a team, success rate per rush under 40%, 145.8 rushing yards per game. It really hasn't been that great. So I think UCLA's defense is able to give Rutgers run game problems in this one. And if you're expecting anything from the passing attack, I mean, Kali Manis very limited in terms of a passer, just over 1,000 yards on the season, 6.4 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Not that he's been practical joke terrible, but, I mean, by no means is Cali McManus going to go out there and win you a football game. Certainly not going to cover a 4.5-point line strictly by the passing attack. That's just not going to happen. So where does that leave me in terms of placing a bet here? Well, personally, I'm unable to bet this one. I'm in New Jersey. This is Rutgers. But if I was able to bet it, I would probably go under here. Super low total for a reason, down at 40.5. UCLA does throw the ball, but super slow pace. 130th in plays per game so far this year. Rutgers obviously going to be stubborn, sticking to the run, probably not going to have a ton of success with it. We should see the clock rolling in this one, a lot of punts, a lot of field goals. Should be an under game, so if I was able to bet it, under 40.5. Next up is Arizona State Cincinnati. Cincinnati laying 4.5 or 5 points at home, total sitting at 50.5. If you take a look at the pie charts, action seems to be coming in on the Cincinnati side. Over 55% of the tickets, 75% of the money. Not going to go through this game. It's disappointing. This would have been a cool one. I was considering an over. The reason I'm just going to skip it, Sam Leavitt has been ruled out, quarterback for Arizona State. And, I mean, Arizona State's glaring weakness defensively this year has been stopping the pass. That secondary is questionable. Sorsby's been a beast. He should be able to throw the ball all over this Arizona State secondary. The reason I can't lay the points with Cincinnati is this Arizona State team is magical this year. Even when they're outplayed, they're finding ways to stay in the game, even win the game. Also, Scattaboo is just a beast. So I can't lay with Cincinnati. I was considering an over, but now that Leavitt's out, it's just a pass. Next game. Next up is Miami-Louisville. I already recorded a video on this one. Here it is. All right, like I said, Canes are on the road here. Louisville's catching, looks like 4.5. I see a 4 and I see a 5. So anywhere in between 4 and 5. That's what Louisville's catching at home here. Total sitting at 61 or 61.5. Depending on your sports book. Let's take a quick look at the pie charts, and according to this data, action's coming in heavy on the Miami side. Over 85% of the tickets, over 85% of the money on the Canes. But as I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Miami offense against the Louisville defense. And Louisville defense has been a little disappointing. We'll talk about it in a second. We'll start with the Miami offense, which has been as explosive as any offense in college football. They're just 7th in OFEI. I don't know how they're not higher than that. Look at the passing numbers. 4th in yards per pass attempt, 5th in success rate per dropback, 2nd in effective pass. They're 2nd in the country in yards per play, 3rd in overall offensive success rate. We've yet to see this Miami offense get stopped. I haven't even seen it slowed down. I mean, they've been cruising. Now, Louisville is coming off a really good game defensively on the road at UVA. Virginia's got Calandria, quarterback. They could definitely throw the ball. And I know you see, Kyle, they gave up 301 passing yards in that game. Just 6.5 yards per attempt, 34% success rate per dropback. Calandria dropped back to pass 45 times in the game. So holding them to just 301 yards with that many dropbacks, it's not bad at all. What worries me for Louisville's defense is their last 2 home games, they got absolutely cooked. Georgia Tech and SMU, in those 2 games, their last 2 home games, gave up over 301 passing yards per game. 55.8% success rate per dropback is terrible. Over 10 yards per pass attempt. Now, Georgia Tech and SMU are very good offenses. We're talking about Miami here. I'd make a strong argument that Miami's offense is better than both these teams. Not to take anything away from them. Georgia Tech and SMU are some powerful offenses, but Miami might have the most dangerous passing attack in all of college football. And we're talking about a Louisville defense that got cooked their last 2 home games through the air. The Hurricanes' offense on the season is averaging 400 passing yards per game. The whole season, averaging 400 passing yards per game, 52.8% success rate per dropback on the season, 10.38 yards per pass attempt. They've been electric. And if this was a couple weeks ago, you could say, hey, Kyle, Miami hasn't really played any defenses yet. And yeah, that's true. I mean, Florida, Ball State, South Florida, Florida A&M, that's who they open up the season with. Last couple of games, they played Virginia Tech, who, look, not a defensive program, but that defense is okay. Cal, they're sitting at 26th in DFEI. That defense looks pretty good. Look, I understand it's not Clemson, it's not Alabama, but they played a couple defenses, and they cooked them all. I mean, no one has been able to slow down this Miami passing attack. I will say this Louisville defense should be a step up from Virginia Tech and Cal, but like I said, this Louisville defense has been a bit disappointing. The pass rush is going to be there. That's one thing you have to give to Louisville. This will be probably the toughest pass, not probably, this will be the toughest pass rush Miami's seen so far. So there's something to give to the Cards here. On the season, Louisville sitting at 17th in pressure rate, 39th in sack rate. So the pass rush is going to be there, but Cam Ward's done a really good job handling pressure so far this year. He's been really creative, really innovative. Pretty solid numbers when pressured. Obviously, when given a clean pocket, he's about as good as it gets in college football. So maybe that's an angle. You're thinking Louisville's pass rush is going to be the one to knock Miami's passing attack off its groove. I personally am not seeing it. And check this out. Louisville's supposed to have this dynamite defensive front. Nobody's supposed to be able to run the ball in Louisville, right? In their last 3 games against Notre Dame, SMU, and Virginia, they're allowing 4.6 yards per carry, 42.5% success rate per rush, 152.7 rushing yards per game. So the Louisville run defense, which is supposed to be the backbone of the team, hasn't even looked that great. Look, I'm not trying to bash Louisville or anything. I'm just saying, I don't know what to make of this. I mean, this defense doesn't look anything like we were expecting it to look. And the Miami offense, yes, it's known for Cam Ward in the passing attack. They've been running the ball too. In their last 2 games against Vatech and Cal, 4.66 yards per carry, 56.8% success rate per rush. That's crazy. 151.5 rushing yards per game. So the idea that Miami could go on the road into Louisville and run the football, if we had this conversation 3 weeks ago, I'd be like, no way. But based on what we've seen recently, Miami's getting the run game going, and Louisville struggling to stop the run against teams like Cal, Virginia Tech. I mean, Virginia Tech and Notre Dame, okay, but this Miami offense is looking pretty explosive. And if you're worried about this being a road game for the Canes offense, look what happened in Louisville's last home game. SMU came into that stadium and smoked them. 50.8% success rate, 7.6 yards per play. SMU went into Louisville and averaged 7.6 yards per play, put up 34 points, beat them outright. So, I don't know if we should just sell all our stock in the Louisville defense, but something doesn't look right. But what about the other side? Let's talk about the Cards offense against the Canes defense, and everything's looking pretty good across the board. And you know what? For all the criticism I just gave the Louisville's defense, the offense looks good. They're 15th in the country in yards per play, 48th in success rate, 21st in PPA. Passing numbers look pretty great here. 12th in yards per pass attempt, 54th in success rate per dropback, 22nd in effective pass. They're sitting at 16th in OFEI. I will say that this Louisville offense definitely racked up a lot of stats in their first 2 games against Austin Peay and Jacksonville State. In those 2 games, averaging almost 55.5 points per game, over 57% success rate. In their last 4 games against Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, SMU, and Virginia, I mean, the numbers don't look nearly as impressive. 26.5 points per game is okay, but success rate below 40%. 6.48 yards per play actually still looks good, but just wanted to point out that Louisville racked up a ton of offensive stats in those first 2 games against bad teams. And as far as the Miami defense goes, you can kind of say the same thing to an extent. In the first 4 games, they were allowing just 10.3 points per game, 31% success rate, 3.87 yards per play. Florida, South Florida, Ball State, Florida A&M. Florida and South Florida, that's impressive. Those are 2 decent offenses. The other 2, not so much. So yeah, Miami's defense looked elite for 4 games. In their last 2 games, we do see the numbers coming up. They're allowing 36 points per game in their last 2 against Virginia Tech and Cal. 6.76 yards per play. Success rate down below 37%, indicative of a couple big plays skewing these numbers. I still have faith in this Miami defense, but I understand based on the last couple games if you don't. This pass rush is still elite. They're 2nd in the country in pressure rate, 3rd in pass rush win rate, 8th in pass rush grade. Louisville's offensive line has been struggling this year, 85th in pressure rate allowed, 88th in hurry rate allowed. So that Miami pass rush is coming. Tyler Shuck has done a decent job with the pressure, though, about the same numbers as Cam Ward. So I'm not saying Miami's pass rush is going to completely throw Tyler Shuck off his game, but I do think it's important to point out that the only defense Louisville has seen this year that's comparable to Miami's talent-wise is Notre Dame. And in that game, Louisville could not really throw the ball. Just 27.3% success rate per dropback. That's not good. 6.4 yards per attempt. So the only time Tyler Shuck saw an elite defense, he was struggling to throw the ball. That being said, that was on the road in South Bend. In his last 2 home games, they had no problem throwing the ball. 11.8 yards per pass attempt, 50.2% success rate per dropback, almost 300 passing yards per game against Georgia Tech and SMU. Georgia Tech, not a good pass defense. I mean, neither of these SMU's actually got a decent defensive front. Neither are comparable to Miami or Notre Dame, though. Not to mention, this Miami defense has been really good on the road so far this year, and they've played some offenses at Florida, at South Florida, at Cal. That's 3 decent offenses. They're allowing just 23.3 points per game in these 3 road games. 35% opponent success rate is very good. So I trust this Miami defense on the road. I think the last 2 games, the final scores aren't really indicative of how those games went. I think this Miami defense might be a little undervalued right now, which is why I think the public has this one right. Everyone's hammering Miami. I think they're going to win by a touchdown plus. So it'll be Miami -4 for me. I haven't bet this one yet. A little worried about how square it is. I would imagine everyone in the world is betting Miami here, but I don't really like the way this Louisville defense has looked. I don't trust it to make stops against Miami. I think the Canes win by a touchdown plus, Miami -4. So yeah, it would only be Miami for me there. The 4s are gone though. You can only get 5s now. It would still be Miami for me as long as it doesn't get above 6. As of right now, I haven't bet it though, so Miami or pass. Big Ten up next. Wisconsin on the road at Northwestern here. Northwestern catching 7 or 7.5 points at home, depending on your sportsbook. Total sitting down at 41.5 for this one. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to this data, action's coming in heavily on the Wisconsin side. Over 80% of the tickets, over 85% of the money on the Badgers. As always, take it with a grain of salt. So I really don't even have to do a deep dive on this game. I knew I was betting Northwestern right away. I mean, a perfect sell high spot on Wisconsin. I said I liked Wisconsin last week against Rutgers. The reason I liked them was the matchup. It wasn't that I was big on this Wisconsin team at all. Rutgers can't stop the run. They also don't have much of a pass rush. So Braden Locke at quarterback, it was the perfect opportunity for him to finally have a decent game. Was going to have run support, wasn't going to be under much pressure. That is not the case here on the road in Northwestern. The strength of this team is the defensive front. This is an elite run defense, and they have a pass rush. We've seen it multiple times. So the comfort and the support Braden Locke had in the Rutgers game, I don't expect it to be there in this Northwestern game. I think they could really disrupt what he's trying to do. And on the other side of the ball, look, I'm not going to sit here and advocate for the Northwestern offense, but Lausch at quarterback definitely gives them a little more energy. I mean, we're seeing something out of them. In the last 2 games, they're averaging 30.5 points per game. 37 of those came in the Maryland game. 36.6% success rate isn't good, but 5.5 yards per play. I mean, it's not terrible. With Lausch at quarterback, they have something. I don't think this Wisconsin defense is particularly good. So I'm getting more than a touchdown at home. I think Northwestern's defense is going to be really disruptive here. I took it. I'm on Northwestern plus 7.5 here. Next game. Virginia is on the road here. Clemson laying 21 points at home. Total sitting at 57.5. Let's take a quick look at the pie charts. And according to this data, action looks pretty split in this one. Maybe slightly leaning towards Clemson, but tickets, money close to 50-50, slightly leaning towards Clemson. That's it. So let's talk about Virginia's offense here. And this is going to be a short one. I mean, as I've said multiple times, this Clemson defense is severely undervalued. If you look at the numbers, they had a lot of points scored on them in garbage time of games. I mean, if you look at this graphic here, it looks like Clemson's defense is just okay. 86th in yards per carry allowed, 91st in success rate per rush, 35th in effective rush. But the truth is, I mean, App State scored 20 points on them in a blowout. NC State scored 28 points on them in the fourth quarter or something crazy like that. So these numbers are a bit skewed. I will say Virginia is going to be the best offense Clemson has seen recently, and Virginia's offense has looked really good in their last 2 road games against Wake and Coastal. 37 points per game, over 45% success rate, 6.28 yards per play. They have looked good in their last 2 road games, but I mean, you cannot compare Wake Forest and Coastal Carolina's defense to Clemson. They're just not even in the same discussion. If you take a look at what Virginia's offense has done when they've seen good defenses, Maryland, Boston College, Louisville, they're averaging just 19 points per game, under 40% success rate, 5.4 yards per play. It doesn't look nearly as good, and I would argue that Clemson's defense is significantly better than all 3 of these teams. Maybe Louisville's close, but still, I'd take Clemson's defense over Louisville. And like I said, this Clemson defense is undervalued because of the garbage time yardage, the garbage time points. Look at their last 2 games against Florida State and Wake Forest, allowing less than 14 points per game. 4 yards per play is crazy. So, I mean, I like Virginia's offense. I like Calandria. He can make plays, but on the road to Clemson. I'm just not seeing it. And on the other side of the ball, we got the Virginia defense, who honestly has taken a big step forward this year, especially against the run. Their defensive front is pretty good. They're 35th in the country in yards per carry, 69th in success rate per rush, 40th in effective rush. The thing is, they haven't seen a ton of elite offenses. In their first 5 games, they were allowing just 3.35 yards per carry, 41% success rate per rush. This is looking like a really good defensive front, and I still think it is a really good defensive front by Virginia standards. Last week, they saw Louisville, and the Cards were able to run the ball on Virginia over 5.7 yards per carry, 43% success rate. In case you haven't been watching college football, since the Georgia game in the opener where they got embarrassed, Clemson has pretty much looked like the best offense in the country. I mean, since that game, in the 5 games they played since Georgia, they're averaging 48.6 points per game, almost 7.6 yards per play. That's in a 5-game sample size. They are annihilating teams right now, putting up a lot of points. Nobody can stop them. So even though Virginia is respectable and it's going to be tougher competition than Clemson has seen the last few weeks, I still think Clemson's just too good here. So I would lean that way. I know Clemson has Louisville on deck, but they have a bye week in between, so I'm not really worried about that. It'll be Clemson minus 21, but I do like this Virginia team, so I don't know if I actually bet this one. Clemson or pass. We're in the SEC next. We got South Carolina on the road in Norman. Oklahoma short home favorites here, minus 1.5. Total sitting at 41.5 pretty much across the board. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to this data, action's coming in pretty heavily on the South Carolina side. About 65% of the tickets and almost 90% of the money on the Gamecocks. Take it with a grain of salt. So what do we think about this matchup? Well, we're going to see some offenses struggling to move the football here. These are 2 very good defenses against 2 very shaky offenses. South Carolina sitting at 98th in yards per play, 102nd in success rate. Not much of a run game, although we have seen them break some big plays on the ground. As a whole, they're sitting 83rd in yards per carry in the country, 88th in success rate per rush. They are 54th in yards per pass attempt. They've made some plays, but still just 110th in success rate per pass, 96th in effective pass. As we know, they're on the road here in Norman. Oklahoma's got one of the best defensive fronts in college football. Elite run defense here, 14th in yards per carry allowed, 10th in success rate per rush, 19th in effective rush. And I know we saw Sellers making plays last week in Tuscaloosa. We're not going to take that away from him. I mean, that was an impressive game for him. 242 yards through the air, South Carolina had. 42.9% success rate per dropback, 7.6 yards per attempt. This was a solid game. Huge stepping stone for Lenora Sellers. That being said, I'm not just going to forget what happened the week before that, where they couldn't do anything on Ole Miss. They had just 162 passing yards in that game, 4.9 yards per pass attempt. That was a terrible game. So not taking any credit away for what Sellers and the South Carolina offense did against Alabama, but I'm not all of a sudden all in on the South Carolina offense. I've still seen too much, and it's not like they're going to have run support here. Again, this Oklahoma defense is elite against the run. On the season, they're allowing just 3.07 yards per carry, 117.5 rushing yards per game, 32.9% success rate per rush. This is an elite run defense. Where we can question this Oklahoma defense is against the pass. In their 4 games against Power 4 opponents, Houston, Tennessee, Auburn, and Texas, they're allowing over 9.1 yards per pass attempt, 43.6% success rate per dropback. So maybe this Oklahoma secondary is a little questionable, but here's the thing. They have a pass rush. They're 16th in sack rate, 50th in pressure rate. The reason that's significant, South Carolina, and this dates back to last year with Spencer Rattler, they struggle to protect the quarterback. 134th in sack rate, 129th in pressure rate. And if you're thinking, oh, well, Kyle, that's fixed now. They had a good game in Alabama. Well, not really. I mean, Lenora Sellers still has terrible splits when pressured. F QB rating, F turnover worthy play rate, F in yards per pass attempt. Last week against Alabama, yeah, they had a decent game. They put up some numbers. He was still pressured on 47.5% of his dropbacks. That was the 7th most of any quarterback in college football that week. How did he look when pressured? Terribly. 5 of 11, 35 yards, a pick, and a 15.3 passer rating. So the problems South Carolina is having offensively, they're not fixed. They still can't protect the passer. They still don't have a consistent rushing attack. And on the road against this Oklahoma defense, they're going to be exploited. Oklahoma has a pass rush, like I said, elite run defense. So I really don't like this matchup at all for South Carolina offensively. But then we flip it over to the other side and honestly copy and paste everything I just said. Everything I just said about Oklahoma's defense. I mean, say the same thing about South Carolina's defense. They're not quite as good against the run as Oklahoma is, but I mean, this defense is still 11th in the country in yards per play allowed, 62nd in success rate. Look at the pass defense numbers, 34th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 28th in success rate per dropback, 4th in effective pass. This Oklahoma offense, in case you haven't watched college football, it's been a struggle. It has been a struggle. 127th in yards per play, 127th in success rate, 128th in PPA. And just like the Oklahoma defense, this South Carolina team definitely has a pass rush. In fact, it's one of the best pass rushers in the entire country. 27th in pressure rate, 26th in sack rate. And just like the South Carolina offensive line, Oklahoma struggling in pass protection. Maybe not quite as bad, but still 102nd in pressure rate, 114th in sack rate. I will say, though, Hawkins, not quite as ugly looking splits under pressure as Sellers. I mean, not that he's been great at all, but Sellers under pressure is terrible. Hawkins, I mean, it's not good. It's just not quite as bad. C+, A-. So he protects the football, but he doesn't make many plays through the air. And just before I was saying Sellers shouldn't have any run support in this game, well, copy and paste that over here. I'm not expecting Hawkins to have much run support either. The South Carolina defense has been solid against the run all year, 3.11 yards per carry. Now, 44% success rate per rush isn't elite. This run defense isn't as good as Oklahoma's, but Oklahoma has not been able to run the ball at all this whole season. They opened up the year against Temple, and they were able to run the ball in that game, but in the 5 games since then, they're averaging 2.92 yards per carry as a team, 31% success rate per rush. So this team can't run the ball. South Carolina's played solid defense against the run. So where does that leave me in terms of placing a bet? I like Oklahoma to win this game at home. It feels like a perfect sell high opportunity with this South Carolina team. Oklahoma coming off the Red River rivalry. They got the shit beat out of them by Texas. Seems like a buy low, sell high spot. I do not think the South Carolina team is better than Oklahoma. I actually think they're pretty similar. So I'm getting the home team at close to a pick 'em. I don't trust Sellers at all under pressure, and he's most definitely going to be under pressure here. So I like Oklahoma to win the game. I also lean towards the under. I know 41, 40 and a half. I mean, that's a super low total, but both offenses are going to really struggle. The reason I probably won't bet the under is I could see both quarterbacks throwing some picks here, some turnovers, because a lot of times in games like this, your handicap for an under could be spot on. Both offenses really struggling to move the ball, but it still ends up getting up and over the total because of a pick six, fumble in their own territory. I mean, really bad offense can lead to points the other way. So I don't know. I could see some turnovers. I lean Oklahoma. Actually, I might bet Oklahoma money line. As of right now, I don't have a bet on this game. On the open bets tab, if you check, you could see if I actually end up placing this one. I'll also let you know on the live show if I end up placing it. But as of right now, Oklahoma or pass. ACC up next. We got NC State on the road at Cal. Golden Bears laying 10 or 10.5 points at home, depending on your sports book. Total sitting at 46.5. I do see a couple 47s out there. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to the data, action's coming in on the NC State side. You love to see it. Over 95% of the tickets, over 65% of the money. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. I mean, I find it hard to believe that over 95% of the tickets coming in on NC State, that has looked pretty bad. But anyway, that's what the data says. So let's get into this one, and we'll start with the North Carolina State offense. And I gotta say, CJ Bailey is starting to show us something here. I know you can't really see it much in the box scores, but check this out. So NC State on the season, they're 54th in yards per pass attempt, 28th in success rate per dropback, 53rd in effective pass. So right off the bat, we know this NC State passing offense is a little undervalued because everyone's just so down on this team right now. Grayson McCall kind of didn't live up to the expectations, and then CJ Bailey came in and was a little shaky there for a second. But the passing numbers on the season don't look bad. Now, the problem is they're matched up against a Cal defense that looks pretty good. 28th in yards per play allowed, 80th in success rate. Look at the pass defense numbers specifically. 34th in yards per pass attempt, 66th in success rate per dropback, 7th in effective pass. So Sharp College Football has this as a very good pass defense. And yeah, if you look at CJ Bailey's numbers on the year, it doesn't blow you away here. Just over 1,000 yards passing, 8.2 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But it does look like this NC State offense is trending in the right direction. Check this out. So in CJ Bailey's first 2 games, North Carolina State averaged 29.5 points a game. But it's important to take note, 28 of the points in the Clemson game were scored in garbage time. So in reality, this is more like 15 points per game. If you look at the yards per play, just 5.3. Success rate, 43%, nothing crazy. Look at the NC State offense in their last 2 games against Wake Forest and Syracuse. Over 50% success rate, 6.86 yards per play. So even though they're only averaging 23.5 points per game, some advanced metrics show us that this NC State offense has been much more efficient in the last 2 games. We're talking about CJ Bailey here, a young developing quarterback. Is it that crazy that he would get better as the season progresses? I don't think it is. In fact, I think that makes sense. The problem is they are going to have their hands full here. This Cal defense does look really good. They're coming off a really excellent performance, and I want to give a special shout out to Cal defense for that. Cal plus 3.5 was my top bet last Saturday, and the offense didn't do shit. Final score was 17-15, so I got my plus 3.5. They honestly should have won that game. They can thank their offense for that loss, but the defense held Pitt on the road in Pitt, 17 points, 4.95 yards per play. The Cal defense looks great. In fact, it's looked great all year. Just 17.8 points allowed per game, success rate under 40%, 4.87 yards per play. You're not going to see me poking holes in this Cal defense. I think it's really good. So by no means am I saying CJ Bailey and the NC State offense are about to go on the road into Cal and move the ball up and down the field and put up a big number. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is this NC State has kind of been under the radar, a little bit more efficient recently, and everyone's looking at this matchup thinking, oh, they're not going to do shit against Cal. I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to get the ball in the end zone a couple times. And you know what? The NC State offense isn't the only unit that's secretly playing better. Look at the defensive numbers in the last 3 weeks against Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse. 25 points per game, just 40.4% success rate, 4.8 yards per play. The NC State defense seems to be getting its shit together a little bit. If you remember, they started off the season looking pretty bad without Peyton Wilson there at middle linebacker. And this is a Cal offense that can't run the ball at all. It hasn't been there all year. In their last 3 games against Florida State, Miami, and Pittsburgh, just 2.38 yards per carry as a team, 34.8% success rate per rush. NC State's been playing great defense against the run in those last 3 games we just referenced. Just 3.32 yards per carry allowed, 34% success rate per rush. So the run's probably not going to be there for Cal, which means Mendoza is going to have to cover a 10.5 point line by himself through the air. And I just don't think that's feasible, especially when I think NC State is going to be able to score a few points in this game. So I'm looking at the North Carolina State side in this one. I haven't bet this one yet, but I'm going to. I'm going to take the plus 10.5. It won't be a huge bet, but I think NC State can play them tough. I honestly think they could potentially win the game. Cal, I mean, that last loss, they've had 3 heartbreaking losses in a row. At what point is the team just a little defeated? I think NC State could be live here. So give me North Carolina State plus the 10.5 next game. Next up is Toledo, Northern Illinois. The only reason I'm including this game is I know a lot of people are going to ask me about it. I had said coming into the season that Northern Illinois was my pick to win the MAC. So I've been getting asked about Northern Illinois a lot. This is a weird one. I know a lot of people are going to take that minus 2.5 against Northern Illinois, and I mean, it makes sense. This Northern Illinois defense has been great. They're 3rd in the country in yards per play allowed, 11th in success rate. They've been great against the run, great against the pass. Obviously, there's question marks as far as the Toledo quarterback situation goes. Is Tucker Gleason going to play? I mean, he missed last game. He has a quote-unquote unspecified injury, whatever that means. But the thing is, the other kid, Richter, played pretty well. Toledo lost last week, not because of the quarterback play. Buffalo just kept running the ball between the tackles, and Toledo fumbled, I believe, 4 times in the game. So that's why they lost that game. But either way, on the road in Northern Illinois, I expect Toledo's offense to struggle. This is a Northern Illinois pass defense that just shut down Connor Bazelak and Bowling Green on the road last week. That had been one of the better, or maybe the best passing attack in the MAC conference this year. So this is a Northern Illinois defense I believe in. I am a little bit worried about the matchup for NIU's offense, though. This Toledo defensive front looks pretty strong. They're allowing just 3.32 yards per carry on the season, 35% success rate per rush. This is looking like one of the best run defenses in the conference. NIU offensively, all they could do is run the ball. Their passing attack's been pretty much non-existent. 125th in yards per pass attempt, 119th in effective pass. They have to run the ball to be successful. Not sure how effective the run game's going to be in this one, but overall, the reason I haven't placed this bet, it's just a terrible spot. Northern Illinois coming off a huge upset win of the season on the road at, well, Notre Dame is probably the win of the season, but as far in terms of conference play, win of the season on the road at Bowling Green. Toledo coming off an embarrassing loss to Buffalo. It's just like the classic buy low, sell high spot for a bet on Toledo plus 3. But personally, I'm big on this NIU team, so I do think they win. I do think they cover minus 2.5 if you can get it. but I'm not going to bet it because it's just a classic buy low, sell high spot for Toledo. So NIU minus 2.5 or pass, but I'm not going to bet this next game. Big 12 up next. We got Houston on the road in Kansas. KU is laying 4.5. This number's down to 4.5. It was at 6.5. Actually, I see a couple 4s. So this number continues to drop. Total sitting at 47.5 pretty much across the board. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to this data, action is pretty split. Tickets are about 50-50, money leaning towards Houston. Just over 60% of the money in on Houston. But as I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So what do we think about this matchup? And I just want to come out and say one thing. I am not buying into this newly found offense for Houston. This offense is terrible. I know they had one decent game. We'll talk about it. So on the season, they're 104th in yards per play, 122nd in success rate, 129th in PPA. The run game, 74th in yards per carry, 120th in success rate per rush, 61st in effective rush. As you know, the pass game's been non-existent. This Kansas defense has been pretty tough. But really what everyone's talking about is the quarterback change. They make the change from Donovan Smith over to Zion Chris, and Houston puts up 30 points and gets a huge road win over TCU. 46.9% success rate, 5.64 yards per play. It was a decent offensive game. I'm not trying to take credit away from Houston or from Zion Chris. It was a decent offensive game. We do have to take note, though, that TCU's defense is pretty terrible and has been pretty terrible all season. I can't unsee what I saw from the Houston offense in the first 5 games with Donovan Smith at quarterback. They were averaging just 10.4 points per game, under 5 yards per play, looking like the worst offense in the Big 12. I can't unsee that. And their offensive problems were way deeper than just Donovan Smith at quarterback. Not that Donovan Smith was playing well, but there were times watching the Houston offense where it seemed like Donovan Smith couldn't get any help, drop passes. The offensive line's been terrible. They're creating zero space in the run game, 118th in line yards, 120th in stuff rate, 117th in run blocking grade. This is still a bad offense, and I'm going to handicap them as a bad offense because that's what they are. I'm not going to let a quarterback change and one game against a bad defense change that. Not to mention, a little bit of a buy low spot on the Kansas defense. In the last 3 games, they're allowing 35 points per game, over 53% success rate, over 7.1 yards per play. Look who they played. West Virginia, TCU, electric offenses. Arizona State, okay, maybe a little bit of a run-heavy offense, but they've been pretty good as well. We're forgetting that through the first 3 games of the season, this Kansas defense looked greatly improved from last year. One of the games was against an FCS program, but the other 2, Illinois, UNLV, solid offenses, just 16.3 points per game, 4.06 yards per play. This Kansas defense was looking good. Yeah, they played a few good offenses and had a few bad games. I'm not saying they're a great defense, but they're certainly more than capable of shutting down the Houston offense, which has been terrible with Zion Chris at quarterback. So I like the matchup for Kansas defense, mostly because I think Houston's offense is pretty awful. But the thing is, on the other side, I'm not really sure I'm liking this matchup for Kansas offense at all. I will sit here and talk shit about Houston's offense, but as far as the defense goes, I've been big on Houston's defense all year. They're 23rd in the country in yards per play allowed, 22nd in success rate. Look at their pass defense, 18th in yards per play, 53rd in success rate per dropback, 11th in effective pass. They've also been solid against the run. And what I don't like about this matchup for Kansas, as we know, Kansas is an offense that wants to run the ball. They do not want to drop Jalen Daniels back to pass a bunch of times. They want to run the football. Well, we just saw them in their last game go on the road to Arizona State. A very good run defense. Arizona State was able to kind of take away the run from them, but Jalen Daniels was able to piece up Arizona State's secondary. That's their weakness. They're not very good in the secondary. They struggle against the pass. This Houston defense is capable of taking the run game away from Kansas, just like Arizona State did, although Jalen Daniels is not going to be able to piece up Houston's secondary like he did Arizona State. Houston's also strong against the pass. In their last 2 games, they saw 2 quarterbacks, Josh Hoover and Rocco Beck, 2 of the better quarterbacks in the conference. They held them to 5.9 yards per pass attempt, 193 passing yards per game. This is a great pass defense as well as a great run defense. So when Houston's able to take away Kansas' run game, or at least limit it, like Arizona State did, Jalen Daniels is not going to be able to bail Kansas out with his arm in this one, or at least he shouldn't on paper. I like this Houston defense a lot, and that's keeping me from laying the 4, even though I really think Houston's going to struggle to score points here. So at 4, I would only lean Kansas. But honestly, I think the way to go here would be just to take the under at 47.5. Betting an under in a Kansas game sounds crazy because they're capable of scoring points fast. They're also capable of giving up points fast, but I truly think both offenses are going to struggle. Both offenses are going to try to establish the run. Both offenses are going to have trouble doing so. So I think the clock's going to be running a lot of punts here.
think it stays under 47.5. I haven't bet this one yet, but I don't hate it. We'll see where I'm at when I get through all the games if I want to add this one, but under 47.5 here. Next game.
Next up is Notre Dame, Georgia Tech. I already recorded a video on this one. Here it is. All right, like I said, Notre Dame's on the road here. Georgia Tech catching 11.5, it looks like, pretty much across the board. Total sitting at 49.5, pretty much across the board. So let's take a look at this matchup. We'll start with the Notre Dame offense. And, I mean, we know what this Notre Dame offense is. They want to run the football. They're 48th in rushing frequency. If you look at their offensive numbers on the year, pretty clear that this is a one-dimensional offense, very reliant on the run game. Although, let's give Riley Leonard some credit. He did throw the ball efficiently in his last game. We'll talk about it in a second. They're 28th in yards per play, 70th in success rate. Rushing numbers, they're 5th, 57th, and 6th. Passing numbers, obviously not as good. 95th, 84th, and 77th. Riley Leonard's numbers on the season look much better after last game. 979 yards through the air, 6.6 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. His last game against Stanford was a good one. 248 passing yards we saw from Notre Dame. Over 48% success rate per dropback, 9.2 yards per attempt. Really the first time we saw Riley Leonard have a big game throwing the football for Notre Dame. In his first 5 games with the team, Notre Dame was averaging just 171.6 passing yards per game, 6.24 yards per attempt, success rate per dropback under 39%. So it was looking pretty bad for the Notre Dame passing attack. Obviously, looking forward, going to be tough to win playoff games with a completely one-dimensional offense. Definitely a good sign that Riley Leonard finally had a good game throwing the football. That being said, Stanford's pass defense is pretty awful. They specialize in stopping the run. That's by far the strength of their defense. So Riley Leonard definitely doesn't deserve a parade for throwing the ball on Stanford. That being said, he's now going to play against the Georgia Tech defense, which has similar numbers to Stanford. Much better against the run. 65th in yards per carry, 32nd in success rate per rush, 30th in effective rush. Pass defense numbers, 82nd, 95th, 102nd. So another defense that specializes in stopping the run. Can Riley Leonard have back-to-back nice-looking games throwing the football? Well, the fact that this is a home game for Georgia Tech is a huge sign for them. They've played much better defense against the pass in their home games. In their 3 home games, they're allowing just 169 passing yards per game, 5.87 yards per attempt, success rate per dropback under 33%. Excellent numbers against the pass at home. On the road, they've been cooked through the air. I mean, 289 yards per game, 9.6 yards per attempt, 49.5% success rate per dropback. These numbers are terrible. They've gotten cooked on the road. This game's at home, so that's a good sign for Georgia Tech. But, I mean, it also could be that they've played some shitty offenses at home. Georgia State, VMI, that's an FCS program, and Duke, I mean, they've played much tougher competition on the road. That could be why their pass defense numbers look so good at home. That being said, if we're talking about strictly the passing attack, I would throw Notre Dame in the same conversation as Georgia State and Duke. In fact, I would take Malik Murphy and the Duke passing attack before Notre Dame's. Again, if we're strictly talking about the passing attack. So I don't think Riley Leonard's going to have back-to-back big games throwing the ball. I think Georgia Tech should be able to limit that. The real question is going to be, is Georgia Tech able to stop Notre Dame's rushing attack? Obviously, we pulled up this graphic before. Very one-dimensional offense. They need to run the football. 5th in yards per carry, 6th in effective rush. And in both their road games, they ran the ball all over Purdue and Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M was impressive in that opener. Who cares about Purdue? They have the worst defensive front in the Big Ten, so I'm certainly not celebrating that. But Notre Dame was able to run the football in both their road games so far this year. But the thing is, I kind of like this Georgia Tech run defense this year. They've done a great job this season with the exception of one game. In their first 5 FBS games, they were allowing just 3.8 yards per carry, 36.5% success rate per rush, under 104 rushing yards per game. Those are great defensive numbers against the run. Now, in their last game against North Carolina, it was bad. North Carolina, 5.9 yards per carry against Georgia Tech, success rate per rush over 51%. This is not good. So what do we do with this data point here? Was this an outlier? Do we trust the first 5 games and say, it was just a bad one for Georgia Tech? Or was this a reflection of what Georgia Tech's defensive front really is? Personally, I've seen enough from Georgia Tech's defensive front against the run this year to have some faith in them. This does concern me a little bit. So as far as making a prediction on this side of the ball, I do think Georgia Tech's able to give Notre Dame's offense some problems, but they will be able to move the sticks on the ground. Just maybe not consistently. It won't be a steamrolling. I like Georgia Tech to be able to give Notre Dame's offense some problems. Now, what about on the other side of the ball? Let's take a look at Georgia Tech's offense. And honestly, they look pretty much exactly how we expected Georgia Tech's offense to look coming into the season. We knew this was going to be a run-heavy attack. We predicted this was going to be a top 25 rushing attack, and they definitely are.
They're 36th in run frequency so far this year. Rushing numbers look great. In fact, offensive numbers across the board look great for Georgia Tech. They're 24th in yards per play, 11th in success rate, 16th in PPA. Rushing numbers, like I said, definitely a top 25 rushing attack here. 16th in yards per carry, 26th in success rate per rush, 21st in effective rush. Pass numbers look good too. Haynes King has really been good. So again, Georgia Tech's offense has looked exactly how we expected it to look. This isn't a fluke. They brought back Haynes King at quarterback. He could run the ball a little bit. Star running back Jamal Haynes. I believe they brought back 4 starters on the offensive line. So this is not a fluke. This is who Georgia Tech is. This is a top 25 rushing attack. I mentioned Haynes King's been efficient. Passing numbers look great. Over 1,400 yards this year, 8 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. Not a ton of big plays through the air. Just a C- big time throw rate. But QB rating looks good. Turnover-worthy play rate looks great. He protects the football. Georgia Tech is not really an offense that's going to give you big plays through the air. I mean, this is an offense that wants to run the football, and Haynes King is honestly the perfect quarterback for it. I feel like people may have gotten a little bit ahead of themselves when it comes to Haynes King and the Georgia Tech passing offense, because through the first 5 games, I mean, they were averaging 276 passing yards per game. Success rate per dropback was over 53%, over 9.3 yards per pass attempt. Georgia Tech was looking like this elite passing attack, but that's not who they are. And then in the last 2 weeks, they saw some better defenses in Duke and North Carolina, and we saw the passing attack come crashing down to earth. Now, something to look at on this graphic, obviously the first thing that jumps out at you, 5.6 yards per pass attempt in the last 2 games. That's a concern, and it is a concern. But success rate above 45% per dropback, meaning he was efficient. He didn't connect on the big plays, but this is a little more what I expected Georgia Tech's passing attack to be, not the huge plays. Obviously, these are not the best games, but they're not looking to dice your secondary up. That's not what Georgia Tech's trying to do. And honestly, I'm not sure if they'd be able to do that to Notre Dame if they wanted to anyway. We saw Notre Dame's pass defense have one bad game against Northern Illinois in the biggest flat spot of all, coming off the Texas A&M game. And really, they just allowed a couple of big plays, 9.9 yards per attempt, but a 35% success rate per dropback. So they weren't even consistently throwing on Notre Dame like that. Just, like I said, just the ultimate flat spot. In their other 5 games, they're allowing just 4.6 yards per attempt, 26%. Success rate per dropback is elite, and it's not like they played nobody here. I mean, Purdue obviously is trash. Miami of Ohio, okay, a MAC program. But Louisville, Tyler Shuck's a decent quarterback. Stanford's got Ashton Daniels. He's okay. A&M, Connor Wegman played in that game. He can play. So they did see some quarterbacks. Nobody has been able to throw the ball in this Notre Dame defense. In fact, Notre Dame's in the conversation as far as best pass defenses in the FBS. 6th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 1st in success rate per dropback, 2nd in effective pass. So yeah, I'd say expecting Haynes King to piece up this Notre Dame defense might be a little bit unrealistic. That being said, it's not the worst matchup, because one of the strengths of this Notre Dame defense is their pass rush. They're 17th in sack rate, 22nd in pressure rate. Georgia Tech's actually been excellent in pass protection. Haynes King has had all day to throw, 11th in pressure rate allowed, 1st in sack rate allowed. So maybe this Georgia Tech offensive line is just good enough. I mentioned before, they brought back 4 starters from last year. So maybe this offensive line for Georgia Tech is good enough to give Haynes King some time. No other quarterback against Notre Dame has had time to try to make throws on that secondary. So part of me thinks we might not even know how good that Notre Dame secondary is. Actually, that's not true. Connor Wegman had time to make throws in that A&M game. He just was horrible. He was just missing targets left and right. So maybe Haynes King is able to make some plays. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen, but there is an angle there. Look at his splits when given a clean pocket. I mean, A+ QB rating, A+ turnover-worthy play rate. He's been excellent when given a clean pocket. So maybe if Georgia Tech can keep him protected, he's able to make throws. Again, I think we should be spending more time looking at the rushing attack, and we'll do that now, but I don't think it's impossible. Now, as far as Georgia Tech running the football here, it's been pretty consistent this season. There was really just one game where they were unable to run the ball on the road at Louisville in week 4, just 2.65 yards per carry, 25% success rate per rush. And that is concerning, but considering we have 6 other data points indicating that this Georgia Tech run game is strong, I'm willing to write the Louisville game off as maybe a little bit of an outlier. We just saw this Georgia Tech rushing attack go on the road into Chapel Hill, rush for 7.7 yards per carry, 371 yards on the ground against that North Carolina defense, which, by the way, had been pretty good this year. So this is a Georgia Tech run game I trust. And look, the Notre Dame defensive front is tough. It's not easy to run the ball on Notre Dame, but it hasn't been unbreakable. Yes, in their 5 games against teams not named Louisville, they held opponents to just 3.37 yards per carry, but 43% success rate per rush is not elite. In fact, that's slightly below average. And then the Louisville game, Louisville rushed for over 5 yards per carry on Notre Dame, 42% success rate per rush. So Louisville was able to run the ball on Notre Dame. You want to know who has a better rushing attack than Louisville? Georgia Tech. Rushing frequency, effective rush yards per carry. Every single one higher on the Georgia Tech side. They run the ball more. They run the ball more efficiently. Look, I'm not saying Georgia Tech's going to run the ball all over Notre Dame's defensive front. That sounds a little crazy, but I do think they're going to be able to move the chains in this game, which is why there's no way I can lay this big number with Notre Dame on the road. Probably going to be a little bit of a public dog here on Georgia Tech. I don't care. I took the 12. I'm in on Georgia Tech plus 12. Think they're able to run the ball. I also think they're able to give Notre Dame's offense some problems. So I took Georgia Tech plus 12. There's just really nothing that we've seen so far that would indicate Georgia Tech's going to be beaten badly. I mean, in that Louisville game where they lost by 12, you can argue they should have won that game. That was a weird finish. Nothing I've seen from Georgia Tech indicates they're going to get their asses beat here. So I took Georgia Tech plus 12. I think they're able to run the ball a little bit. So yeah, I'm on Georgia Tech plus 12. That number's long gone. You can only get 9.5s and 10s now. I guess Haynes King is going to play. He's listed as questionable. I'm reading that he's practicing. I would assume the number dropping from 12 to 9.5 is indicative of Haynes King playing, but who knows with college football. So yeah, I'm holding Georgia Tech plus 12. Now that it's under 10, I mean, my pick would still be Georgia Tech, but obviously it's lost a lot of its value. So I'm on Georgia Tech plus 12. Next up is Alabama, Tennessee. Already recorded a video on this one. Here it is. All right, like I said, we got Alabama on the road in Knoxville for this one. It looks like the Vols are catching a full 3 now. I see a couple 2.5s out there, but for the most part, everyone's moved this one up to 3. Total sitting at 56.5 pretty much across the board. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to this data, action's coming in heavily on the Alabama side. Over 80% of the tickets, over 90% of the money on the Tide. But as I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. Let's take a look at some head-to-head history, and as I'm sure you know, Alabama has controlled this rivalry. This graphic goes back the last 11. Alabama's 10-1 in those games, but their last trip to Neyland, they did lose 52-49. That was to the Hendon Hooker team. Bryce Young was playing quarterback in that game. 52-49. That was an awesome game. So Tennessee beat these guys their last trip to this stadium, but we're not interested in the past. We're talking about this matchup right here. Let's start with the Alabama offense. 35th in rushing frequency so far. They've been running the football, running a slow pace too. 115th in pace, controlling the line of scrimmage, controlling the clock. That's what we've seen from DeBoer so far. Offensive numbers look pretty excellent across the board, as you would expect them to. 7th in yards per play, 24th in success rate, 9th in PPA. Rushing numbers, 68th in success rate per rush. Whatever. I mean, 33rd in yards per carry, 19th in effective rush. Look at the passing numbers. Jalen Milroe taking giant steps forward this year in terms of being an efficient passer. 3rd in yards per pass attempt, 4th in success rate per dropback, 14th in effective pass. He's coming up on 1,500 passing yards on the season. Over 11 yards per attempt. Over 11. He's got 12 passing touchdowns so far this year. He's got 4 interceptions, but his turnover-worthy play rate is an A+. So, I mean, he has thrown 4 interceptions, but according to Pro Football Focus, he hasn't been putting the ball in harm's way much. So Jalen Milroe's been great as a passer so far this year. So how does he match up against this Tennessee pass defense? And we were talking about this last week. Tennessee might be a little bit fraudulent in terms of defending the pass. If you look at their first 4 games, absolutely elite numbers against the pass. 5 yards per attempt, 37.5% success rate per dropback, 125 passing yards allowed per game. Elite numbers against the pass. Against who? Chattanooga. NC State has no passing attack this year, although Grayson McCall did play in that game. That was before he got hurt, but still, I mean, he wasn't good at all. Kent State, Oklahoma, their offense is terrible. So in these first 4 games, they have elite numbers against the pass. Didn't play anybody. Look at the last 2 games against Arkansas and Florida. The numbers look significantly worse. Success rate up over 45%, over 8.4 yards per pass attempt allowed. And honestly, they should be worse than this. They played Arkansas and got completely cooked through the air. Arkansas had almost 300 passing yards in the game, 9.9 yards per attempt, 53.1% success rate per dropback. Arkansas cooked on the Vols secondary. And then last week against Florida, Graham Mertz got hurt in the game. Before leaving the game with an injury, he was 11 of 15, 125 yards, a touchdown, no picks, a 165 passer rating. So he was carving up Tennessee's defense as well. Florida was up 10-0 when he got hurt. If Graham Mertz doesn't get hurt, Tennessee might not even win that game. So I have serious questions when it comes to the Tennessee pass defense. Now, on the season, they still have elite-looking defensive numbers here. 2nd in yards per play, 6th in success rate, 4th in PPA. Look down at the bottom of this graphic, though. The pass defense numbers starting to drop. If we looked at this graphic 2 weeks ago, Tennessee was basically top 6 or 7 in every single metric on here. Starting to drop back in the pass defense. Now, they're still rated 10th in effective pass. 2 games is not enough to skew that, but still, I have my doubts when it comes to Tennessee defending the pass. The big question in this one is, will Tennessee be able to generate pressure on Milroe? They do have a pass rush. They're 13th in pressure rate, 20th in pass rush grade, and dating back to last year, that has been the weakest point of Alabama's offense is the pass protection. This year, 52nd in pressure rate allowed, 24th in pass blocking grade, so it's not quite as bad as last year. They seem to be shoring things up in that department, but that's the question. Is Tennessee able to generate pressure here? Now, the good news for Alabama is Milroe has gotten much better at handling pressure. Last year, these numbers did not look like this. QB rating, A+ when pressured. Yards per attempt, A+ when pressured. So in an offense whose weakness is pass protection, you like to see it. I like that a lot for Milroe. Personally, I don't believe in this Tennessee pass defense, and I think Milroe should be able to throw the ball on him. Now, if you are looking to bet Tennessee, I do agree with you that I'm not sure if the run game's going to be there for Alabama. Tennessee's pass defense, we can poke holes in. Run defense looks pretty good. Yeah, we can pull up the first 4 games. They racked up elite defensive numbers, same as against the pass. But in their last 2 games, when we saw the pass defense struggling, run defense still looks good. Just 3.24 yards per carry, 37.3% success rate per rush. So the run defense hasn't faltered. It's the pass defense that's fallen off a cliff. So I still have faith when it comes to Tennessee's defensive front against the run. But when it comes to defending the pass, that secondary, I don't believe in it much anymore after what we've seen the last 2 games. And also, I like Milroe a lot. I think Milroe's improved greatly from last year, so he should be able to throw the ball on Tennessee's defense. Now, what about the other side? Let's talk about the Tennessee offense. 11th in run frequency. This is an offense that wants to run the football. Numbers are looking pretty good on the season. 39th in yards per play, 33rd in success rate, 31st in PPA. Rushing numbers 25th, 65th, 20th in effective rush. Passing numbers efficiency-wise look pretty good. They're back at 86th in effective pass, and the reason for that is they just don't throw the ball much. So obviously, Sharp College football is not going to put them in the top 25 for passing attack when they just don't throw the ball much. Nico's numbers on the season look pretty good. Over 1,200 yards, 8.5 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. But kind of like the Tennessee pass defense, really racked up a lot of nice-looking numbers in those first 4 games. 303 passing yards per game, almost a 60% success rate per dropback, 10 yards per pass attempt. These numbers looked excellent. Then in their last 2 games against Arkansas and Florida, not exactly defensive juggernauts there. Under 6 yards per pass attempt, 40.3% success rate per dropback, 163.5 passing yards per game. So Nico racked up a ton of stats in those first 4 games. Now Oklahoma's in there in those first 4 games, so it wasn't all scrubs in terms of defenses that he's seen. But in the last 2 weeks, I mean, we're really seeing him come down to earth. He's starting to look a bit like a freshman throwing the ball. I have good news if you're a Tennessee fan. What is going on with this Alabama pass defense? In the first 3 games, just like Tennessee, they were looking elite. They were allowing 3.33 yards per pass attempt, 24.3% success rate per dropback, looking like they might be the best pass defense in college football. That was against Western Kentucky, South Florida, and Wisconsin, too. 3 decent offenses, so it's not like they were playing scrubs. It was looking like Alabama might be the best pass defense in college football. Then what the hell happened? Against Georgia, Vanderbilt, and South Carolina, they allowed 311 passing yards per game, almost a 50% success rate per dropback, 9.47 yards per attempt. What happened? This Alabama pass defense looks so good, it has fallen off a cliff. Now, if you pull up their defensive numbers on the season, they still look good. I mean, they were so elite in those first 3 games that we really aren't seeing the effects of it yet. They're pretty much top 25 across the board. Against the run, against the pass, they're still sitting at 6th in DFEI. And just like Tennessee, the key here is going to be, can Alabama generate some pressure? They're 49th in pressure rate, 24th in pass rush grade. And just like Alabama, Tennessee's offensive line, not the greatest in pass protection. 55th in pass blocking grade, 99th in sack rate allowed, 54th in pressure rate allowed. So Alabama should be able to generate some pressure. But we talked about how Jalen Milroe greatly improved this year when pressured. Nico has not handled pressure well. In fact, it's been pretty awful. He's got an A quarterback rating when given a clean pocket, an F when pressured. Yards per attempt goes from a B+ to an F. So Nico has not handled pressure very well at all. So with both of these offenses having questionable pass protections, definitely prefer Milroe, who's been excellent under pressure. Also, he's obviously got more experience. So I definitely like that for Alabama. Now, what about the run game? Is that going to be there for Tennessee? Well, just like every other aspect of their team, what has happened in the last few games? In the first 3 games, they're averaging almost 7 yards per carry as a team, 51.5% success rate per rush. Look at their last 3 games. Under 3.6 yards per carry as a team, 36.4% success rate per rush. That's against Oklahoma, okay. Arkansas and Florida, I mean, those are decent front sevens. They're not great. So this Tennessee run game that they were leaning on the beginning of the season, their 10th in rushing frequency or whatever the number was, they want to run the ball, hasn't really been there in terms of efficiency. And when it comes to Alabama's defense, yeah, we can point at the pass defense and be like, what's going on here, Alabama? But the run defense has been good as hell. They struggled a little bit against South Florida early in the season, but look at the 4 games since then, allowing just 3.29 yards per carry, 41% success rate per rush, 131.8 rushing yards per game. That's against Wisconsin, Georgia, Vanderbilt, South Carolina. So it's not like they're playing bad teams here. This Alabama run defense looks really strong, which really puts Tennessee in a bad spot offensively. So in terms of placing a bet, you already know I'm on Alabama here. I got it at 2.5. Hopefully, if you're trying to tail that, you could still get a 2.5. But even if it's at 3, I still would pick Alabama. So yeah, I'm on the Tide here. Unfortunately, looks like the 2.5s are gone. I still like Alabama at -3, though. I'm even seeing a couple 3.5s pop up. Yeah, definitely on Alabama here. Next game. Big Ten up next. We got Michigan on the road at Illinois. Illini catching 3.5 points at home. Total sitting at 44.5, pretty much across the board here. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to this data, action's coming in heavily on the Michigan side. 80% of the tickets, over 80% of the money. So a lot of action coming in on Michigan according to this data, which you should take with a grain of salt. So what do we think of this matchup here? And we'll start with the Michigan offense. And we know what this Michigan offense is. Very good rushing attack, no passing attack whatsoever. It's about as one-dimensional as it gets in college football. They are still sitting at 37th in OFEI. Rushing numbers look great. 24th in the country in yards per carry, 43rd in success rate per rush, 7th in effective rush. We don't even have to look at the passing numbers because it's irrelevant. They can't throw the ball, and when they try to, it's not very impressive. Good news for Michigan is they're up against the Illinois defense, who has struggled recently against the run. Specifically the last 2 weeks, it's been a struggle for Illinois stopping the run. They did have that really impressive game on the road in Nebraska in week 4. I believe that was a Friday night game. I had Illinois +10 in this one. They won outright. They shut down Nebraska's run game. They held Nebraska to just 50 yards rushing in the game, 38.7% success rate per rush, 1.56 yards per carry. And at the time, we were like, okay, maybe this Illinois defensive front is a little better than we thought. Well, since then, in their last 2 games, they can't stop anybody on the ground. Penn State's understandable. Purdue? Are you serious? I mean, 6.4 yards per carry allowed in their last 2 games, 240 rushing yards per game, almost a 61% success rate per rush. So this Illinois run defense, after the really impressive road game against Nebraska, fallen off a cliff here. And the thing with this Michigan run game is even when they're not getting the explosive plays, like in the USC game, we saw those big runs. They ended up winning that game outright. Even when those aren't there, look at their last 2 games. Minnesota and Washington, just 4.11 yards per carry. The big runs were not there. Still 46.2% success rate per rush, meaning even when the big runs aren't there, even when they're not averaging 5.8 yards per carry, when they hand it off, they're still getting their 4 or 5 yards. And I just don't see any way Illinois is able to stop that. This Illinois defensive front has been getting blown off the line of scrimmage, 127th in line yards, 127th in stuff rate. Michigan's offensive line, although it's struggling in pass protection in terms of creating space in the run game, they've been great. 39th in line yards, 20th in stuff rate, 46th in run blocking grade. I just don't see how the Illinois defense is able to get off the field in this game. We should see long, boring drives that eat up a ton of clock from Michigan in this one. I think Illinois could throw 8 guys in the box and literally sell out to stop the run here, and I don't think they're able to do it. honestly. So the question becomes, on the other side of the ball, is Luke Altmaier able to throw the ball on this Michigan secondary? Because I think we can agree that the run game probably not going to be there for Illinois in this one. This isn't a great rushing offense. They're just 103rd in yards per carry, 100th in success rate per rush. They are sitting at 45th in effective rush, but if you've watched Illinois play, the run game doesn't really impress you. It's Luke Altmaier and the passing attack. That's what Illinois lives by. So will it be there in this one against Michigan? Well, on paper, it matches up all right. Michigan much stronger against the run than they are against the pass. They're actually just 29th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 48th in success rate per dropback, 38th in effective pass. So when you glance at these graphics here, you might think, okay, it's a decent matchup for Illinois offensively. Luke Altmaier can probably make throws. And then you look at Michigan's last game on the road in Washington, and Will Rogers was piecing this defense up. 315 passing yards in the game, 9.5 yards per pass attempt allowed here by Michigan, 50% success rate per dropback. Will Rogers had no problem throwing the ball in this Michigan defense. So you might be thinking, all right, Luke Altmaier can definitely throw the ball in this defense. Well, I'm not so sure about that. What do we know about Will Rogers and the Washington passing attack this year? He gets rid of the ball quick as hell. One of the quickest in the country, top 25 in terms of time to throw. 3-step drop, ball out. 5-step drop, ball out. Gets rid of the ball fast. What a quarterback like that can do is take the opponent's pass rush out of the game. Luke Altmaier is not like that. In fact, he's in the bottom 40 of the country in terms of time to throw, and he's struggled for his pass rushes this year. Look at his splits when given a clean pocket versus when he's pressured. A significant drop-off here. So in the Washington game, Will Rogers was able to get the ball out quickly, kind of neutralize this Michigan pass rush. That's not really the type of offense Illinois runs here. That's not the type of quarterback he's been so far this year. So I have doubts on whether or not he's able to throw the ball in Michigan. We saw this Illinois offense go on the road against Penn State, another elite pass rush. He didn't look that great. 185 yards passing in the game, 7.4 yards per attempt, 38.7% success rate per dropback. This was by far his worst game of the season, and here comes another elite pass rush in Michigan. Maybe not quite at the level of Penn State, but they have some talent in terms of edge rushers, and I really don't like the matchup for Altmaier here. You know he's not going to have run support. Michigan's got an elite run defense, and Illinois hasn't run the ball for shit this year. In their games against FBS opponents, Kansas, Central Michigan, Nebraska, Penn State, Purdue, they're averaging just 3.46 yards per carry as a team, 38.1% success rate per rush. They don't have a rushing attack, so he's not going to have run support against Michigan, which means there's going to be a lot of pressure on Luke Altmaier to throw the ball with that Michigan pass rush coming, and I don't like it. So in terms of placing a bet, as much as I would love to take that plus 3.5 at home, I can't do it. I think Illinois is really going to struggle to score points in this game. Am I willing to lay 3.5 on the road with a Michigan offense that's completely one-dimensional, that I don't really trust? Nah, not really. I'd lean towards the under here at 44.5. Put a gun to my head, force me to bet a side. I'd say Michigan minus 3.5, but just give me the under at 44.5. I haven't bet this yet. I might. Under or pass. Next up is Colorado, Arizona. Already recorded a video on this one. Here it is. All right, like I said, Buffs are on the road here. Arizona laying 3.5 or 3. It was at 3.5. Looks like it's dropping down to 3. Still some 3.5s out there, though. Total sitting at 58 or even 58.5, depending on your sports book. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to this data, it's a pros versus public game. Public coming in on the Colorado side, over 65% of the tickets. Money coming in on the Arizona side, over 60% of the money. But as I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. Let's take a look at some head-to-head history. These two teams have split recently, 2-2 in the last 4 matchups. Colorado's 3-1 against the number in the last 4 matchups, but we're not interested in the past. We're talking about this matchup here. And let's start with the Buffs offense, which, I mean, we already know what it is. This team does not run the ball. They throw the ball. They're 3rd in pass frequency so far this year, and the passing attack looks great. They're 49th in OFEI overall, but in terms of the passing attack, 43rd in yards per pass attempt, 40th in success rate per dropback, 8th in effective pass. Now, on paper, this might be a little bit of a tough matchup for Colorado. Arizona's actually played really strong defense against the pass, 49th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 64th in success rate per dropback, 44th in effective pass. If you go by FEI ratings, Arizona's defense is 52nd, Colorado's offense is 49th. So these two units pretty evenly matched here. In Arizona, like I said, it's been strong against the pass. Now, Colorado's passing attack does seem to be coming along as of late. In weeks 2 and 3 against Nebraska and Colorado State, just 6.2 yards per pass attempt, 42.7% success success rate per dropback. But since then, they've played 3 games: Baylor, UCF, Kansas State, and 8.77 yards per pass attempt in those 3 games. Success rate per dropback about the same, 42%. But Shedeur Sanders and the passing attack has looked a little bit better as of late. But like I said, this Arizona defense has been solid against the pass. In their last 4 games, they've seen some offenses too. They're allowing just 225.3 passing yards per game, 7.2 yards per attempt. Success rate per dropback under 40%. Kansas State's in there. Yeah, they want to run the ball, but still, that's a good offense. These are good numbers. Utah, Cam Rising didn't play. Texas Tech, though, Baron Morton can throw the ball. BYU, we know Retzlaff can throw the ball. So again, this Arizona defense been really solid against the pass. And what I like about this matchup for Arizona is they can pressure the passer. 23rd in pressure rate so far this year, 30th in pass rush grade, 12th in pass rush win rate. As we know, dating back to last year, that's been the Achilles heel of this Colorado offense is the pass protection. They're just 116th in pressure rate allowed, 113th in sack rate. Now, credit to Shedeur Sanders. He's done a much better job handling pressure this year. You can see these splits don't look bad at all. In fact, it's pretty impressive. He's been much better against pressure, but I think we can all agree that the pressure is coming. Last week against Kansas State, he was pressured on 40.8% of his dropbacks. That was 19th most in all of college football last year. And although his splits when pressured look better this year, he really wasn't great when pressured last week. He was sacked 4 times, 6 of 13, 53 yards, a pick, 25.5 passer rating. And it gets a little concerning because if you pull up Colorado's schedule, who are the 2 teams they've played so far this year that have a pass rush? Nebraska, Kansas State. So yeah, I'm a little concerned that Arizona's looking like they might have a top 25 pass rush here because that's how you beat this Colorado offense. You pressure the passer. And we know Shedeur Sanders isn't going to have run support in this game. He never does. They don't even try to run the ball. They're averaging just 2.43 yards per carry on the season, just 62.3 rushing yards per game, which is a shame because that happens to be the weakness of the Arizona defense. They're allowing 4.56 yards per carry, 44.6% success rate per rush. That's how you beat this Arizona defense is run the ball. That's not what Colorado does. So I'm not really loving this matchup for Shedeur Sanders and the Colorado offense, even though they have been playing good football recently. But what about the other side? Let's talk about the Arizona offense that really seems to be going through it. As we know, this is an offense that wants to throw the ball with Fafita. They're 10th in pass frequency. Their numbers on the year: 34th in yards per play, 100th in success rate, 106th in success rate per rush. They're 72nd in yards per pass attempt, 82nd in success rate per dropback. They're still rated 23rd in effective pass, but that's falling quickly. Fafita has more interceptions than touchdowns this year, 8 touchdowns, 9 picks, 7.1 yards per attempt, an F QB rating, 1,633 yards. He really went off in that opener, and we were like, oh, it's fine. Arizona didn't need Jed Fish. Fafita's fine. 422 yards, 13.6 yards per attempt against New Mexico. Since then, it's been a struggle. 38% success rate per dropback, 6.18 yards per attempt. This passing attack from Arizona that looked so dynamic last year just really hasn't been there. And don't look now, but Colorado's playing some defense. Even the last 2 games, they're allowing 8.65 yards per pass attempt. Still just 36.4% success rate per dropback. And look at the 3 games before that against Nebraska, Colorado State, Baylor. Just 6.2 yards per pass attempt, 32.6% success rate per dropback. This Colorado defense has been great, man. And what I said about Shedeur Sanders not having run support, you could say the same thing about Fafita here. In the last 2 weeks, Arizona's averaging 3.87 yards per carry, 37.3% success rate per rush. They've been struggling to run the ball. And like I said, Colorado's playing solid defense against the run as well. 4.14 yards per carry allowed on the season, just 41% success rate per rush. So really don't like this matchup for Arizona's offense either. Now, you would think Arizona coming off a blowout loss that this would be a spot to buy low on them. But here's the thing. I checked it out, and it looks like that trend only is applicable to the NFL. Since 2021, teams coming off this is college football, teams coming off a loss of 28 or more points that are favored the next week, 115-39, okay, who cares, 75-77-2 against the spread. So actually below 500 against the number. Not that I was going to bet Arizona anyway, nor would a trend like that influence my bet. I just thought it was interesting enough to share because I thought it would be the opposite. Anyway, where does that leave us in terms of placing a bet? Well, I won't lay points with Arizona right now. I don't like the way Fafita's looked. I don't like the way that offense looks. I like what Colorado's done defensively recently, but I also don't like the matchup for Shedeur Sanders enough to take the points. So I'm on the under here. Here's the problem. Market's moving against me. It's up at 58.5 now. It's been bet up from 55.5. So clearly, sharp action is coming in on the over, I'm guessing, because both these teams are going to be throwing the ball a lot, I'm assuming. But in my opinion, the weakness of both of these defenses is stopping the run. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see both of these offenses running the ball a little more than we're used to seeing. Look, the market's against me here. Sharp action seems to be coming in on the over. I don't care. I'm not scared to bet against the market. Give me the under, 58.5.
Next up, we got Baylor, Texas Tech in Lubbock. Texas Tech laying 6 or 5.5 or 6.5. This line's all over the place. Total sitting at 55.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts. According to this data, we got actually coming in on the Texas Tech side about 55% of the tickets, about 70% of the money on the Red Raiders. As I always say, take it with a grain of salt. So let's talk about this matchup, and we'll start with the Baylor offense. Not looking great. 83rd in yards per play, 90th in success rate, slightly below average rushing numbers, slightly below average passing numbers. Here's the thing when it comes to the Baylor offense. Look at their numbers in week 3 against Air Force. 230 yards on the ground, over 6 yards per carry, 55.3% success rate per rush. They scored 31 points in that game, averaged 7.7 yards per play with a 55.7% success rate. Now, you might be thinking, Kyle, why are we looking at their numbers against Air Force? They're terrible. That's very true. The reason I'm pointing this game out against Air Force, that's the only time Baylor has not played against a really good defense. Look at their other 4 FBS games. Utah, BYU, Iowa State. I mean, that might be 3 top 15 defenses. Now, Colorado's in there, but even the Colorado defense is much better than we expected. So, yeah, when we look at Baylor's offensive numbers on the year, they're going to look pretty bad because this team has been through the gauntlet as far as defenses they've seen. In those other 4 FBS games, they're averaging 23 points per game, just 4.79 yards per play. Yes, the rushing numbers look bad in those other 4 games. They played 3 really good defenses and 1 pretty good defense. Just 3.22 yards per carry, 35.1% success rate per rush. Now they're going to see the Texas Tech defense, and I mean, to be honest, Texas Tech defense is pretty good as well. So it's not like, oh, they get a break. In their last 4 games, they're allowing just 3.77 yards per carry, 40.7% success rate per rush. And if I'm being honest, I don't really trust Sawyer Robertson at quarterback. Not that his numbers look terrible, but 7.3 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. But here's the thing. Sawyer Robertson is from Lubbock, Texas. That's where Texas Tech is located. That's his hometown. He's returning home here. The reason he's not playing for Texas Tech, they didn't offer him a scholarship out of high school. And then when he entered the transfer portal for Mississippi State, they didn't pick him up. So they passed on this kid twice. Now he comes back to his hometown with their conference rival. Tell me that's not the ultimate revenge spot. Coming back to his hometown against his hometown team that passed on him twice. Look, I don't like to bet solely on storylines, but I kind of like that. I think he's going to have himself a day here in front of his friends and family at his hometown. I like it. I like the spot a lot for Sawyer Robertson. So I'm definitely going to be taking Baylor here. I am a little worried about the Baylor defense. They've looked good, but their strength is stopping the run. And you know, Baron Morton at home, he's going to be throwing the ball. So yeah, I'm a little worried about Baylor making stops against the Texas Tech passing attack, but I'm playing the storyline here. Sawyer Robertson returning to his hometown in front of his hometown friends and family against the team that passed on him twice. Let's do it. I got a 6.5. Baylor plus 6.5. I'd still play it at +6 next game. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to get to a lot of these night games. I do have a video on Georgia, Texas, though, so I'll put that in here. All right, Bulldogs on the road in Austin for this one. Texas laying 3.5 points at home. Total sitting at 55.5 or 56, depending on your sports book. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to this data, action's coming in pretty heavily on the Texas side. Over 65% of the tickets on Texas, almost 80% of the money on Texas, but as I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Georgia offense. As you probably know, if you've watched Georgia football the last couple of years, this is an offense that revolves around Carson Beck and the passing attack. They're 23rd in pass frequency so far this year, and the numbers look great. I know we saw him throw some picks in that Alabama game, but that one first half against Alabama, if you remove that first half, other than that, Carson Beck's been pretty much flawless as a passer this year. Kentucky gave him some problems as well.
But in terms of the numbers, it looks great. 23rd in yards per pass attempt in the country, 20th in success rate per dropback, 4th in effective pass. Carson Beck over 1,800 yards on the season, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 8.7 yards per pass attempt so far this year. He's thrown for 400 or more yards in 2 of his last 3 games. He's never done that before, so he's on a bit of a hot streak throwing the football. In their last 3 games, Georgia's averaging 379.3 passing yards per game, 52.1% success rate per dropback, 8.9 yards per attempt. So the passing attack is definitely there for Georgia. It looks good. It looks explosive. Here's the problem. They're playing Texas, and Texas pass defense, I mean, wow. On paper so far this year, Texas has the best pass defense in the country statistically, allowing just 126 passing yards per game, 31.7% success rate per dropback, 4.52 yards per pass attempt. They're allowing 4.5 yards per pass attempt on the year. That's first in the country. First in yards per pass attempt allowed, 5th in success rate per dropback, 1st in effective pass. Like I said, on paper, this is looking like the best pass defense in the country, but here's the problem. Against who? Check this out. So if we pull up OFEI ratings, want to know the best offense Texas has seen so far this year? The best offense, Michigan at 39th. Let me repeat that. The best offense that Texas has seen so far this year is Michigan. In case some of you don't follow Big Ten football, Michigan's offense is pretty terrible this year. So, look, I'm not trying to take credit away from Texas, but when we're talking about their defense and when we're looking at numbers like this, I mean, sure, it looks great. Look at the pass rush numbers here. 19th in pressure rate, 33rd in pass rush win rate, 4th in sack rate, 4th in pass rush grade. Looks great, but I mean, against who? They're racking up these numbers against who? This one is against Georgia. And sure, the Bulldogs have had their problems this year in other departments, but this might be the best pass protection in college football. They're 4th in pass blocking grade, 8th in sack rate, 9th in pressure rate allowed, and they've actually played some teams. They've played Alabama, they've played Kentucky, they've actually seen some defensive fronts. This is an elite pass protection here, so for the first time, we're going to see how good this Texas pass rush and this Texas pass defense really is. Now, in terms of stopping Georgia's rushing attack, this is where I will give Texas a little more credit. First of all, they've been great against the run, 3.04 yards per carry, 36.2% success rate per rush. Yes, they haven't played any offenses, but Michigan can run the ball a little bit. But really, it's not so much the Texas run defense I'm looking at, it's the lack of rushing offense from Georgia. Sure, they were able to run the ball in Mississippi State, 5.8 yards per carry, 48.3% success rate per rush. In their 3 games before that, just 3.47 yards per carry as a team, 41.9% success rate per rush, just under 108 rushing yards per game. I mean, yes, they played Alabama, Auburn, and Kentucky. That's 3 possibly top 10 run defenses, but I mean, so is Texas. It doesn't get any easier here for the Georgia rushing attack. So I'm not sure if Georgia's able to run the ball on Texas here. And another angle, if you like Texas in this one, it's on the road. Georgia has looked significantly better offensively in their home games, 38.5 points per game at home, 51.5% success rate at home. On the road, those numbers drop to 23.5 points per game, 40.4% success rate. So no question, Georgia's offenses look much better at home. This one's on the road in Austin. It's a tough spot. Personally, I do think Carson Beck can throw the ball on Texas defense. I think the Longhorns pass defense is a little bit overrated based on the fact that they haven't seen a single decent, not even a decent passing attack. So I like Georgia to be able to move the ball here. On the other side, we got the Texas offense, and things are pretty balanced here. 53rd in pace, pretty even when it comes to play calling. They can run the ball, they can pass the ball. Numbers look pretty great across the board here. They're 7th in the country in yards per play, 10th in success rate, 10th in PPA, 39th in effective rush. They're 9th in effective pass. Offense is sitting at 5th in OFEI. Quinn Ewers numbers on the year: 886 passing yards, 8.3 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Not a ton of big plays downfield for Quinn Ewers, just a C- big time throw rate. And honestly, what concerns me a little when it comes to the Texas passing attack, didn't look that great when they played legitimate defenses. Michigan and Oklahoma, averaging under 238 passing yards per game, 36.8% success rate per dropback is not great, 7.1 yards per attempt. They did, however, rack up a ton of excellent-looking passing numbers against terrible defenses. 341 passing yards per game, 10.88 yards per pass attempt, 56.7% success rate per dropback. So they looked elite against Colorado State, Louisiana Monroe, Mississippi State, UTSA.
terrible defenses. So you would think the Texas passing attack might be in a little bit of trouble here against this Georgia defense. But here's the thing. I don't even know what I think about the Georgia defense right now. Through the first 3 games, they looked excellent against Clemson, Tennessee Tech, and Kentucky. They were allowing just 91.3 passing yards per game. 91.3. 22.9% success rate per dropback. 3.77 yards per pass to them. Elite against the pass through 3 games. Look at their last 3 games against Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, allowing over 293 passing yards per game, 9 yards per attempt, 47.9% success rate per dropback. So what exactly are we supposed to do with these numbers? I mean, is Georgia a bad pass defense? It's starting to look like it, although they look so elite through 3 games, and they played Clemson, who's looking like one of the best offenses in the country. They shut Clemson down. So yeah, welcome to college football. Tough with these data points. Georgia's defensive numbers on the year, they're 67th in yards per play allowed, 43rd in success rate. Look at those pass defense numbers at the bottom dropping. 73rd in the country in yards per pass attempt allowed, 67th in success rate per dropback, 42nd in effective pass. So Georgia's pass defense is outside of the top 40 according to Sharp College Football. So even though Texas has struggled throwing the ball when they've seen good defenses in Michigan and Oklahoma, not sure how good Georgia's pass defense is. Makes it tough to handicap. I personally think Texas should be able to throw the ball a little bit on Georgia. And if I'm being honest, they might be able to run the ball on Georgia too. Through the first 4 games, they were averaging 4.74 yards per carry, 50% success rate per rush, almost 190 rushing yards per game. In their last 2 games, they've been even better than that. Over 6.1 yards per carry, 54.6% success rate per rush, 187.5 rushing yards per game. One of those games is against Oklahoma. We know Oklahoma has a great defensive front 7. We've seen it. So even though I don't think this Georgia run defense is necessarily bad, but we just saw Texas run the ball in Oklahoma, which means they definitely should be able to run the ball in Georgia. Not to mention, we've seen Georgia struggle with the run a little bit. In the Alabama and Auburn games, they were allowing 4.92 yards per carry. 33% success rate per rush is actually good. So these aren't really that bad. But like I said, we just saw Texas run the ball in Oklahoma. So this is turning into a dangerous run game here. So where does that leave us in terms of placing a bet? Well, if I'm being honest, I mean, when was the last time we've seen Georgia lose to a team not named Alabama? November of 2020, 4 years ago. That was the last time Georgia lost a football game to a team not named Alabama. And we're not just talking about losing the game. We're talking about losing the game by more than 4 points. I don't know. It doesn't seem responsible. I do understand why Texas is favored by more than a field goal, but there's no way I'm laying 4 points to Kirby Smart. Now, I'm a little worried. I kind of think Georgia at this number is going to be a bit of a public square dog here. I don't care. There's no way I could lay 3.5, 4 points to Kirby Smart. They haven't lost a game to a team not named Alabama in 4 years. And this is Georgia. It's not like they play cupcake schedules. They're beating the shit out of everybody. So, look, I understand that so far this year, Texas has looked elite and Georgia has looked vulnerable at times. But you know what else that describes? The Ohio State-Oregon game when I took Oregon plus 3.5, saying, guys, who cares what happened in these early games? These are the games that define these teams. Yeah, I'm on Georgia plus 4. I also think it goes over the total at 55.5. I do think Texas is able to run the ball and score some points, but I like Carson Beck to throw the ball on this Texas pass defense that has not been tested once. Give me. So yeah, I'm on Georgia. I bet it at plus 5. I also took the money line, so I'm on the Bulldogs. Also, we talked about UCF Iowa State on the live show. I'll put that in right here. Am I crazy to say that if you're looking for a big dog to take a shot on, that UCF might be worth a glance? Am I crazy to say that?
You're absolutely crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the magic is gone for this UCF team. And I want to preface this by saying I am sitting here in my studio in Orlando as a former student athlete of UCF. So I'm not saying this with any bias. Like, if I had any lean towards UCF, I would probably take it. But this is pretty much writing on the wall that this is a pack it in season for UCF. Made the change at quarterback last week against Cincinnati. KJ Jefferson wasn't getting the job done, but it had kind of been that way since the opening game. They scored 51 points, but in the first half, KJ Jefferson had like 30 yards in the entire first half. And then, they were kind of getting carried by the running game there. And it's tough, right? They're number 1 in the country in offensive success rate. They're in rushing offensive success rate, super explosive in the run. but they're so one-dimensional. They bring in Ja'Cory Brown, who is just kind of wet behind the ears, like inexperienced, not quite where they want him to be, but they had to make something to try to salvage the season, and it didn't work. Right? They play against Cincinnati. Cincinnati ends up winning that game. In the last 3 games that UCF has played, they scored 21, 13, and 13 points. This is a team that plays fast and wants to score a lot. When you're playing fast and want to score a lot and you're only scoring an average of like 18 and a half points, like you're not in for a recipe for success here. Now they're playing against an Iowa State team that, you know, at the beginning of the season, I faded Iowa State. I came on here and I bet Iowa, and all you guys were like, what the hell are you doing? You should bet Iowa State. And I remember that. And I was like, wow, Iowa sucks. But as the season progresses, we start to notice stuff about Iowa State that really gets us excited. Number one, everyone wants to say Rocco Beck is going to take the next step. I think he has. He's so far this season, 11 plays. He's had a 50-yard pass or more so far this season. He's a really good sample. They have a complement of 2 or 3 really good running backs that anytime could be deployed. But it's not going to be the running game that is going to be the effectiveness of this game. It's going to be the passing game of Rocco Beck. And the second thing that I really like, and it's kind of coupled with Ja'Cory Brown playing in this game, if Iowa State's able to stop the run, they have one of the best defenses, especially at taking the ball away in the country. So far this season, they lead the Big 12 in turnover margin. 9 plus 9 is their turnover margin. They have a crazy amount of interceptions this season, something in like 20 or like some ridiculous, insane number, right? And that's a problem, right? They load the box and they're going to say, beat us through the air. I'm laying the 13.5 with confidence. This was close to being my best bet of the week. The only thing is if there's a little bit of a second week, like find something in practice that UCF, might find. But 2 things I want to say also for anybody who's worried about laying 13.5 points with Iowa State. Their average margin of victory so far this season, 19.7. They're plus 6.3 to the spread, which means they're covering spreads by 6.3 points or more.
I am definitely taken off guard by that. When he said, when I read that he wanted to talk about this game, I knew that he was a Central Florida alum. So I was like, okay, maybe he's going to have some insight on this new quarterback. Maybe he likes an angle here. I was not expecting you to go with Coach Campbell. And he said with confidence. He said those words, with confidence.
The complete opposite of what you thought he was going to do.
The opposite of what I thought he was going to say. Scoop, are you with him?
This is also one of my favorite bets of the week is Iowa State minus 13.5.
Wow.
Brad pretty much said everything I was going to. I'm a big fan of this Iowa State team. First 6-0 start since 1938. Minimum wage was 25 cents then. So the question I was thinking is, do I lay 13.5? I mean, yeah, this UCF team is just not the same UCF team as last year. Their offense is broken the last couple weeks. They did bench J.J. Jefferson for Ja'Cory Brown, which was probably the right move. But the last 3 games, they're a middle-of-the-road offense. This Iowa State team, I mean, kind of like their basketball team from last year, relied on defense to start the season, but really they're coming alive on the offensive side of the ball. I'm pretty ashamed with Kyle. We're big Matt Campbell fans here at the Sauce Network. So this team is just better in all 3 phases of the game. They're playing at home. They have a newer quarterback now with UCF. Iowa State's 15th in defense. They're going to play in a tough road environment. And Rocco Beck is having an awesome season. So Gus Malzahn seems lost right now. I think this is going to be an absolute blowout.
So here's something I'll add. So first of all, I didn't do a full deep dive on this game at all. I threw UCF up there as like a kind of prerequisite. I thought that's what Brad was about to say. So I will say I do see a path. We've seen Iowa State get run on a couple times this year. Iowa was able to run the ball on Iowa State a little bit. West Virginia was able to run the ball on Iowa State. Look, this is a very good defense, but we've seen a rushing attack have some success running the ball on Iowa State. And at UCF, as bad as they've been, the games where they've gotten blown out, it wasn't that the rushing attack really failed, more so than they got down early and kind of had to abandon it in a way. So I do see a path where UCF comes out here and hands the ball off. But, I mean, what Brad said about the turnovers is huge. Are they going to be able to protect the football? But I do see a path to UCF handing the ball off, just grinding out 4.2 yards per carry, keeping Rocco Beck on the sideline and keeping it somewhat competitive. But, I mean, on the other side, UCF hasn't shown us any inkling that they can stop the pass. Rocco Beck at home here should have a perfect passer rating. So I get why they would be on that side. They're a lot more confident than me. I didn't even. You can actually take mine down. take my plus 13.5 down. I don't even want it up there.
Speaking of Rocco Beck, if anybody who likes the player prop market, his number opened so low. I don't know what it's at, but it opened at like a staggering like 240 or 236. I still play that like up to 250.
So yeah, Brad and Scoop seem really confident on Iowa State. If you want to tail them, I personally am probably just going to pass. I'm a little worried about Central Florida running the ball on Iowa State and covering the number, so I'm going to stay off that one. As far as the rest of the games I didn't have time to get to, we'll talk about them on the live show, 10 a.m. to kickoff. We'll go through, I think we have 29 games lined up, but just let's see if I can find anything. LSU Arkansas. I bet Arkansas +3. LSU coming off the big home win. They're much better at home. Now they go on the road, kind of a letdown spot against an Arkansas team that's coming into this game with some confidence, coming off a bye. I like the spot for Arkansas. I think they could win outright. So I bet Arkansas +3. It looks like it's at 2.5 now. So that's another one I'm on. USC Maryland. I kind of like Maryland plus the 7.5 there. We'll talk about it on the live show. So unfortunately, that's all the time I have. I promise we're growing pretty quickly here. By next fall, I should be able to provide handicaps for every single game. We're getting there. So yeah, thanks for watching. See you on the live show, 10 a.m. up to kickoff. We'll go through a bunch of the games. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the comments. If you want to go see my top bets, all the bets I have open, parlay of the day, that kind of stuff, I'll be posting that tonight, probably around 10 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want to go check that out, don't want to wait till the live show, just want to find out what my favorite bets are, just go over to the website and sign up to Sauce Network Plus. Yeah, see you all in the morning, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Let's have ourselves a good one.